What would make a father leave his daughter's wedding and return with a gun? What could he have seen? What could he have learned in the span of just a few hours that made him believe the only way to protect her was to end everything? This wasn't just rage. It was purpose. It was heartbreak dressed in resolve. It was love so twisted by betrayal that it forgot where the line was between justice and murder. Because no one walks back into their child's reception with a wrapped box unless they believe the gift inside will right a terrible wrong. And no one pulls the trigger unless they're convinced it's already too late. This is True Crimes Alter, where family ties are tested, sins are uncovered, and justice demands a price. Where the cake was cut, the glasses clinked, and the first dance would be their last. The sky was painted with early June light, warm, cloudless, and soft as if the day itself were blessing the union. Glass lanterns hung from tree branches, flickering gently in the late afternoon breeze. Rows of white chairs lined the garden aisle, now half empty as guests mingled near the reception tent, sipping champagne and laughing beneath silk drapery. It was the kind of wedding you'd expect from a loving, middle-class family, beautiful but simple, tasteful without pretension. The bride, Elena Brooks, had always dreamed of an outdoor ceremony, and now she had it. Elena was radiant, modest lace gown, bare shoulders catching the last of the sun, her long curls tucked behind one ear. Her laughter floated like music above the crowd. Her new husband, Jeremiah Langston, stood at her side, one hand on the small of her back, the other cradling a glass of champagne. He was handsome in a quiet way, tall, with close-cut waves, a shadow of a beard, and the composed posture of a man who had worked hard to reinvent himself. His navy tux fit him like memory, precise, clean, and maybe just a bit too careful. They had just finished their first dance, an old Motown song, and guests were still applauding as they made their way through the crowd. Her father, Mr. Howard Brooks, stood near the edge of the tent, watching. He wore a gray suit, crisp and understated. Not a tear in his eye, not a smile either, just stillness. Someone clinked a fork against a wine glass. The toast began. "Ladies and gentlemen, my daughter is married." Howard's voice rang strong, but his eyes didn't sparkle. They searched the couple like he was reading something he didn't quite trust. Elena beamed, reaching for his arm. "Daddy," she said softly, "we did it." He gave her a tight nod. "You did." The guests erupted in cheers, raising glasses. But Howard's hand, still holding the mic, trembled. No one noticed. It wasn't until later, after the cake was cut, after the bouquet was tossed, after Jeremiah had spun Elena around beneath the hanging lights, that the envelope appeared. A waiter, face unfamiliar, handed it to Howard near the bar. From the parking lot, said it was urgent. He took it without speaking, slipped away from the crowd. Inside the groom suite, he locked the door, tore the flap open, and pulled out 3 documents. One was a mugshot. The second, a sealed juvenile court record, now unsealed. The third, a photo of a girl, young, crying, swollen lip, hospital bracelet. Howard stared at them for a long time. The music outside was muffled now, just bass notes and laughter through walls. He sat down slowly, paper trembling in his hand. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't hearsay. It was evidence. Dated, notarized. The man who had just kissed his daughter's forehead at the altar had once stood in front of a judge for harming a minor. A case buried in youth records. Paid off. Protected. Elena never knew. He was sure of it. Howard stood up. He didn't cry. Didn't scream. Just moved like something inside him had snapped back into place. Back at his house, only 7 minutes away, he opened the safe, pulled out a pistol, a matte black Springfield .45 caliber, registered, clean. He placed it inside a long velvet box, the kind designed for champagne or jewelry, laid black satin over it, closed the lid, wrapped the box in gold paper, added a red ribbon, drove back without saying a word. At 8:23 p.m., Elena and Jeremiah were at the sweetheart table, laughing as guests took photos. Jeremiah leaned in to whisper something in her ear. She blushed, giggled, swatted at his chest. She kissed him on the cheek. He turned to kiss her fully, slow, soft, like he meant every second of it. It was a quiet kind of intimacy, not loud or vulgar, but sincere. The kind of kiss that says, "I'm proud to be yours." Howard walked in just as they pulled away. "Elena," he said warmly, holding the box, "I forgot something earlier." She looked up. "Daddy?" "A gift." He placed the box on the table in front of them. "It's special. I want you both to open it." Jeremiah blinked. "Now?" Howard's voice didn't raise. "Yes, now." Guests paused. Some smiled. One woman even called out, "How sweet." Elena glanced at Jeremiah, confused but trusting. She began to untie the ribbon. The lid fell open. Her eyes froze. Jeremiah leaned in, staring. His shoulders stiffened. Inside the box, perfectly still, was the gun. A long breath passed. Howard's voice broke, quiet but clear. "You lied to her." Jeremiah's lips parted. "Sir, You looked me in the eye," Howard continued, "shook my hand, and you let her wear your name without telling her who you really are." Elena reached for her father's hand. "Dad, please. What's going on?" He turned to her, eyes red now. "I'm sorry, baby, but I can't let you live this lie." "Dad, no." Howard pulled the weapon from the box with surgical calm, pointed it at Jeremiah's chest. "No," Elena screamed, lunging between them. The first shot hit Jeremiah. He dropped instantly. The second shot, Elena gasped, her eyes wide. She looked down at the red blooming across her dress. Guests screamed. Someone knocked over a wine tower. The third shot rang out, into the air, maybe or maybe not. When the police arrived minutes later, they found Howard Brooks sitting on the floor beside his daughter's lifeless body. He had set the gun down gently. His hands were folded in his lap. And he was crying. The wedding tent was no longer a place of celebration. Guests screamed, tripped over chairs, and fled in every direction. A slow-motion panic rippled across the lawn. A little boy cried for his mother. Glass shattered beneath a toppled buffet table. Elena's body lay crumpled in front of the sweetheart table. Her veil had slipped halfway off, stained red and tangled in her curls. Her hand was still extended toward her father, frozen in that last desperate reach. Her lips moved faintly, one final whisper caught in her throat before her eyes lost their light completely. Jeremiah lay slumped beside her, chest heaving, a puddle of blood expanding beneath him. He reached for her hand, but couldn't find the strength. His breath came in sharp gasps, then nothing. Howard Brooks didn't run. He didn't speak. He knelt beside Elena, took the edge of her gown, and wiped the gun clean. Then he folded his hands on top of it and waited. By the time first responders arrived, most of the guests were off the lawn. Only a few remained, paralyzed by shock or crouched behind overturned chairs, praying. Detective Isaac Ronan was called in less than 30 minutes later. Tall, mid-50s, lean frame in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, he moved through the scene with quiet precision. No sunglasses, no visible emotion, Just a steady gaze and a notepad he rarely looked down at. He stepped around the blood, ducked under police tape, and studied Howard silently. "Weapon still on site?" he asked one of the officers. "Yes, sir. He hasn't moved since we cuffed him." Isaac looked at the older man, sitting in the grass as if he belonged there. Face wet, but calm. Shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Fingers trembling, but lips sealed. He crouched next to him. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Detective Ronan. Can I ask what happened here tonight?" Howard didn't answer at first. His jaw tightened. "She was my only child," he finally said, voice low. "My only one." Ronan nodded slightly. "And the young man, Jeremiah Langston, what did you know about him before today?" Howard turned his head slowly. "Nothing," he said. "That's the problem." Ronan said nothing, just listened. "I asked questions," Howard continued. "They gave me church answers. He's clean. He's changed. He's a good man. My wife believed it. Elena believed it." "And you didn't?" "I wanted to, until someone delivered the truth." Ronan leaned forward. "Truth?" Howard looked him in the eye. "A sealed juvenile record. Assault. A 14-year-old girl. She had to get reconstructive surgery." He swallowed. "I read the court summary. I saw the photos." Ronan's hand stopped scribbling. "Where is that file now?" "In my car. Glove compartment. I didn't bring it to make a speech." "Who sent it to you?" "I don't know. No name. Just a note. You should know who's taking your daughter's last name." It wasn't rage in his voice. It was sorrow, like something sacred had been broken and could never be repaired. Ronan stood up. "Two bodies. One killer. One motive. But the details, they'd need to be unwrapped slowly." Later that night, at the station, Ronan sat at his desk surrounded by witness statements. They all told the same story. It was a beautiful day. They looked so happy. He walked back in like everything was normal. The box, it looked like a gift. He said something about lies, about betrayal. He shot Jeremiah first. Then Elena tried to stop him. Some were sobbing too hard to finish. Others just repeated the same question. Why would he do that? Why? But Ronan didn't ask why. He asked what else hadn't been said. He ran Jeremiah Langston's name through two systems. Clean. No current criminal record. No open investigations. Then he checked juvenile archives. Redacted. Sealed. It took a court order and an emergency hearing at 3 a.m., but by morning, the truth surfaced. At 17, Jeremiah had been accused and later adjudicated for a violent assault on a 14-year-old girl from his church youth group. The family never pressed full charges. They took a settlement, and the records were buried until now.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Back at the hospital morgue, Elena and Jeremiah lay on separate gurneys. Their names not yet tagged. Their faces peaceful in the fluorescent stillness. Ronan stood outside the viewing window with Elena's mother, Margaret Brooks, a petite woman in her 50s with warm eyes, now dulled by devastation. "She didn't know," she whispered. "My baby didn't know anything about his past." Ronan nodded gently. "Did your husband ever mention suspecting something?" "Of course he did." But Jeremiah had answers. He worked at a charity, played piano in church, volunteered at the children's center. She wiped a tear with a trembling hand. He gave Elena the kind of attention her last boyfriend never did. He was gentle, protective, loving. Ronan folded his arms. And yet, he kept a secret this large? I don't think he planned to forever, she whispered. I think he was afraid. Afraid she'd walk away. And maybe he was right. There was silence between them. Then she looked up, eyes flooded. I loved him too, Detective. I did. Ronan didn't respond. There was nothing to say. At the precinct, Howard gave a formal statement. No lawyer, no tears. Just truth, raw, unelegant, final. I wasn't going to do it, he said. Not at first. I thought I could talk to her, warn her. But I looked at her face, so happy, so trusting, and I realized it was already done. You didn't think she could make her own decision? Ronan asked. I didn't think she had all the information, Howard replied. She didn't know what he was, what he did. And I couldn't let her spend one more night thinking she was safe when she wasn't. And so you killed them both. Howard's voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't mean to shoot her. I didn't. She stepped between us. He leaned forward, fingers clenched. Do you know what it feels like to love someone so much that killing them feels kinder than letting them be destroyed slowly? Ronan closed the file slowly. No, he said flatly. But I know what it feels like to bury someone who didn't deserve to die. By morning, the headlines had reached every corner of the state. Father murders bride and groom at wedding reception after groom's secret is exposed. The Velvet Box Killer. What made a father turn into a gunman? A wedding, a lie, a funeral. The internet exploded with opinions. Some called Howard a hero. Others called him a murderer. Some blamed Jeremiah for not disclosing his past. Others asked why Elena had to die too. But none of them were there. None of them saw the look in her eyes as her father raised the weapon and whispered her name one last time. 3 days passed. The reception tent had been cleared, the tables dismantled, the grass washed clean. But the stain on the community, on the families, remained. Detective Isaac Ronan stood alone in the evidence room, reviewing the sealed juvenile file that had unraveled everything. The pages were brittle with time, but the weight they carried was unbearable. Jeremiah Langston, age 17 at the time, had been arrested after a church retreat in Georgia. The charge, criminal sexual conduct with a minor. The victim, Nina Stokes, age 14. The incident, a late-night encounter in a dorm-style cabin. Alcohol had been involved. Nina's statement was clear. Jeremiah's defense was silence. The court had ordered juvenile rehabilitation, no conviction, due to a closed-door agreement between the two families. The records were sealed, and he was told to start over. He did. He moved cities, changed schools, graduated, joined a mentorship program for inner-city youth. Then he met Elena. Ronan met with Nina Stokes, now 25, working in a community library 2 towns over. She wore wire-frame glasses, a cardigan over a long dress. Quiet, measured, every word carefully weighed. Jeremiah Langston, she repeated, as if tasting the name again. He was soft-spoken, polite. Everyone thought he was golden. What happened that night? Ronan asked gently. She looked away. I said no. He didn't listen. Silence stretched between them. Did you ever think he might do it again? He asked. She turned back. No, she said. I think he learned. But that doesn't mean he deserved a clean slate. And it doesn't mean a girl had to die for it. Elena's funeral drew hundreds. Her casket, a soft ivory white. Her dress, untouched, just as she'd worn it on the day she became a bride. Margaret Brooks held her daughter's childhood Bible close to her chest as she sat in the front row. She didn't speak, just stared. Behind her, dozens of young women, Elena's students, wore pale yellow ribbons in their hair, the color of her bouquet. Jeremiah's family held a private burial the next day. No photographs, no obituary, only a whisper of a ceremony and a sealed tomb. No one from the Brooks family attended. Ronan sat with Margaret, days later, in the soft-lit kitchen of her now silent home. A wall of photos behind her, birthdays, Easter Sundays, school graduations, one final wedding picture she hadn't had the strength to take down yet. She would have forgiven him, Margaret said finally. Elena would have cried, been angry, but she would have tried to understand. And your husband? Ronan asked. She swallowed hard. Howard wasn't built for betrayal. He didn't have the wiring for it. When trust snapped, something in him broke too. Do you think he regrets it? No, she said. I think, in his mind, it was always going to end one way or another. He just decided to choose the ending himself. Ronan filed his final report with no loose threads. It stated clearly, Howard Brooks acted alone. Motive, protection of his daughter based on concealed history of groom. Intent, targeted murder. Second casualty, bride, resulted from obstructive movement in line of fire. Disposition, defendant in custody. Confession obtained. No plea negotiations requested. A month later, sentencing was handed down without the show of a trial. No jury, no testimonies. Just facts and a courtroom that listened in cold silence. Howard Brooks was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He stood when the sentence was read. His lips did not part. His hands did not shake. The only movement came when Margaret turned away from him and left without looking back. Outside the courtroom, a reporter shouted, "Do you feel justified in what you did?" Howard didn't answer, but a half-second pause in his step said more than words ever could. Ronan stood outside Elena's school later that evening. Children were still filing out. Yellow balloons tied to a memorial bench fluttered in the summer wind. He thought of all the things the law could measure: gunpowder residue, trajectory paths, autopsy reports. But what it couldn't measure was a father's heartbreak, and the split-second moment when fear drowns love. Back in the evidence room, Ronan took out the velvet box, the one that had been carefully wrapped in gold paper the night of the wedding. He opened it. Inside, the pistol rested on its silk lining. Next to it, something that hadn't been reported, a folded note. He pulled it out, opened it. 2 sentences. You were all I had. I'm sorry it ended this way. The words weren't written in rage. They were written like a prayer. Outside the precinct, the night was still. No sirens, no voices, just wind. And in that quiet, Ronan whispered to no one in particular. Secrets don't always kill. But silence? Silence is a slow poison, and sometimes love taken to its furthest corner becomes the very thing it swore to protect you from. The anniversary came quietly. No vigils, no candles, just silence and memory. Margaret Brooks didn't visit the cemetery that day. Instead, she sat in her living room, holding Elena's wedding shoes in her lap. They were still ivory white, still clean. She had never walked in them. A pastor stopped by, an old family friend. He sat beside Margaret and read softly from Psalm 147, verse 3. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. Margaret listened, but her heart was not ready to be bound. Only time could do that. And time was still grieving too. In prison, Howard refused all interviews. He never spoke about the gun, never mentioned the gift box. But one afternoon during a counseling session, he broke his silence. "I didn't plan it before the wedding," he said slowly. "But once I knew, I couldn't unknow." The counselor asked if he regretted it. Howard didn't answer, just stared at the concrete floor for a long, silent stretch. Then finally whispered, "I regret being too late to be her father before I tried to be her judge." The town eventually stopped whispering. New weddings were held. New couples kissed under that same hilltop tree. But something always lingered. A shadow behind the laughter. A caution behind the vows. People remembered. Not just the tragedy, but the chain of silence, the broken systems, the signs missed, and the truths ignored. Some tragedies don't spark riots or protests. They spark healing, quiet, slow, real. One brave voice inspires another. And sometimes that's how redemption begins. As for the story, there was no fairy tale. No happy ending. No justice neat enough to satisfy every heart. But there was a lesson. And that's what True Crimes Alter leaves you with. Narrator moral reflection, poetic and condemning. When we take justice into our own hands, we risk burying the very people we're trying to protect. Love without wisdom becomes obsession. Grief without guidance becomes rage. And truth delayed becomes a time bomb. One that doesn't care who it takes when it finally explodes. If you find yourself facing evil, don't carry it alone. Don't let silence become your executioner. Don't mistake vengeance for justice. There are authorities, counselors, support groups. There is help, there is hope. And most importantly, there is always another way. Howard Brooks believed he was saving his daughter. But in trying to erase her mistake, he erased her future. What do you think? Was Howard a grieving father pushed too far? Or a man who let rage dress up as righteousness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. We drop haunting, real-life stories every week. Because some truths don't rest until they're told. This is True Crimes Alter. And we speak for the silenced.